Good afternoon, everyone. We'll have the roll call. Madam Clerk?
Rivera,
Yeah.
Director Boyce,
Here.
Director Palmer,
Here.
Director Atwater.
Here.
Great. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, now is the time for public comment. This is a time when members of the public may address us on any issue not on the agenda. I don't have any requests at this time. We have received, I think, one piece of correspondence, but other than that, I have no requests to address us at this point. So we'll move right along to approval of the minutes.
I move approval.
Second.
Any questions, discussion? Those for motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Okay, consent calendar's next, but we have nothing on the consent calendar. We'll get right to the discussion items. First, we'll review the engineering work plan.
So I would like to introduce Joe Cazares. He is our DCA engineering manager. He joined the team in May of this year. He's a registered engineer in the state of California, holds a civil engineering degree from UC Berkeley and an MBA from University of Texas.
Go Bears.
Go Bears. Yeah. 38 years of experience in design and construction of very large infrastructure projects, and comes to Sacramento and the DCA via the Panama Canal, where he spent 8 years as the program manager for the canal expansion program and as the locks construction manager for the third set of locks design build project. I think that says enough about the type of experience Joe brings to the team. He's been an invaluable partner to me in the organization in focusing the team on producing well thought out execution plans and delivering on those plans. With that, I will hand over to Joe, who will go over the highlights of our engineering work plan for the upcoming year.
Thank you, Catherine. Joe, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and yes, go
Great.
Bears.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, what I'm going to do is go through this presentation and highlight. One of the things I'd like to set the stage for is to have the members of the board and the audience understand that the fundamentals of our best practices in engineering are more than just the standards and procedures that we have. We also have a lot of useful tools that we use. There will be some examples of those that Andrew's going to show in his presentation. I'm just going to highlight one, which is what we use as a cost estimate. So whenever we look at conceptual designs or look at alternatives, we take a look at that, and we're able to use that model to look at not only the design aspects of it, but also what's the impacts on the community and what is the cost benefit of seeing what design alternatives to use and all that. So I just want to let you know that there's a lot of basis that we use when we look at engineering that is more than just doing calcs and whatnot. We look at the big picture on that. So with that in mind, the key elements that we're currently doing in this planning phase is that we provide services to the DWR environmental planning team. We also supply them with sufficient information so that they can study the impacts that occur from where the project is moving. The other thing we do is we provide plane speak. It doesn't come from me. There's other folks in our team that have a better articulate handle of the language, so they provide plane speak that takes the technical aspects and plays it out there so that it's quite understandable to the public. And the other aspect is we take all of this and we develop conceptual engineering reports. In this next slide, what I want to show you here is our organization. Now, big picture wise, in the DCA office, we have approximately 35 engineers, staff, and other support individuals there. Remotely, we have approximately 260 staff members that support this effort. And if you take a look at the organization here, the engineering management position is where I sit. I just want to highlight a few things on this thing. One of them is that we have some feature design elements. We've taken into consideration the the tunnels and the shafts, the pump station design, and you move over to where you have site civil logistics. if you look at site logistics, we looked at is the evaluation of construction impacts. And we look at how to minimize impacts to the community and how do we make construction far more efficient. And then we get into field work. Andrew is going to have that presentation here shortly, so we'll get into more details about it. The next one is where we have a lot of reach back support. We have the ability to reach and get any type of specialty services, support that we need to answer some of the challenging questions we may have. And you have a construction strategy, which is a little further down when we move on to the project. The next slide is basically a summary of some of the work products. And as you can see from the numbers on your deliverable count, there's quite a number of them. They're broken down into 9 categories with variable deliverables. And the majority of these are what we call technical memorandums. These memorandums contain the engineering analysis and the evaluations that we have, all supporting and running up into the concept engineering reports to support the CEQA process. And as you can tell, there's quite a bit of activity going on. A lot of these activities are currently underway. They vary in challenge in the process of either having it done in a month or several months or whatever, depending upon the complexities that we're looking at. On this particular slide, all we're trying to emphasize here is the process. In engineering, right now in this phase, we are a support function. We are the ones that we support the environmental process or whatever is given down to us as we need this so that we can actually support the environmental process, look at what impact studies are. The second half is an engagement process where we get requests from our stakeholder engagement team where they look for how do we display, how do we show the activities we're doing, and how do we do this in a not only a informative way, but also one that can be clearly outlined to everyone what we're doing. So we have, those are our 2 main functions there. Now if you move on to the next slide, I think this is an important one. I want to highlight that the cooperative and collaboration between DWR. In fact, DWR DCO office now has a new executive director. He's in the audience right now. I'll embarrass him a little bit. Tony Myers. So he's back there someplace.
He's got a great name, that guy.
So we have started that collaboration in a earnest fashion. But this diagram, what it shows is basically that we're here working in collaboration with the DWR Conveyance office, and as you can see, that DWR is involved in the independent technical review panels and also the technical working groups that we support. Just one element on that technical independent technical review panels you'll see on the next couple of slides. So moving on to the working groups that we have identified 7 working groups in which our team, the DCA engineering group, works with the DWR, DCO office, and where we work collaboratively to go through many of the elements that we have. The meetings are set up either monthly, bi-weekly, depending upon the complexity, depending upon how much information we're going to be working through on this. This is done collaboratively with the DWR folks. The other thing is, as you can see, the participants are the DCA technical leads, which includes Andrew over here. We have technical and operations experts from DWR that participate. And in some areas, we have DWR scientists that are involved in that. And there's feedback, and we go through the memorandum and do reviews. And then all of the comments are logged, and the resolves are comments, and we resolve those comments. If you look at the next slide, this one is more of I guess, I'd like to point this out a little bit, is that on 6 of these items, we felt that it would be important to have independent technical review panels. They're independent of the DCA, independent of DWR, and what these panels do is they look at the 6 functions I have here: seismic intakes, pumping plant, construction logistics. From there, what they do is, with this panel, they come in at various stages as we progress the design and look at, are we going in the right direction? Did we look at everything? Did we miss something? Excuse me, that's an excellent approach. So we're looking for that independence so that we make sure that we have that from the world expert. We look at global experts, we look at people who have that experience for us. And they get involved in the different phases for us so that we can make sure that we have all of the known knowledge input on the design we're doing at this time. And at the end of this process, a report is developed, and that report will be presented to the board. On the last slide are there any questions?
Questions?
Nice presentation, very good job.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no questions. This is pretty good. No questions of Joe, so Andy can. Before we review the field work plan, I do have a request to address us, so let's take that right now from Ms. Meserve. You said 7A, so,
I made a mistake. If I could go for 8A.
oh, no. Too late. No problem, I'll call,
You need to
remind
speak
me,
to the
because I'll
engineering
forget.
plan.
Okay, I'll write it down. Okay, 8, what about, you also want 7C? Did you want to address this on 7C, just so I know, I mean? 7B. Okay, well,
Yes.
you guys are not real helpful.
Get your cards up now, folks.
Yeah, you know, that's not, I don't know your name, but you go on up, go on.
I'm waiting for you guys to go first. Who was there?
Yeah, because we have to do our thing, and then he'll make the comments
Well, I understand, but submit them now, because it's not very helpful. Okay, Andy, do 7B then.
All right, I'll introduce Andrew.
All right, Catherine.
So Andrew
Thank
is a registered geotechnical engineer, and he leads all of our field work for the DCA. He is a principal geotechnical and tunnel engineer with Jacobs and is taking a hiatus from his role as their global technical lead for tunnel engineering to serve our program. He has 25 years of experience working primarily on geotechnical aspects of water projects, including the Freeport intake, which is just upriver of the previously proposed intake locations. The new water project in Singapore, where there were multiple design-build packages for 75 different tunnels and trenchless works, and a major tunnel crossing of the Rio Grande levee in El Paso, Texas. He has a BS in civil engineering from Bucknell University, so no bears. What are they? Bison? Go
Bison,
Yeah.
Any bison present?
And geotechnical engineering from
On
the
your own.
University of Washington in Seattle. And he's here to walk you through our field work plan in the upcoming years, as well as some of the modeling work that they're currently doing.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. Is this working? You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Great. So the fieldwork execution plan identifies the key team responsibilities, which include my particular favorite, which is the subsurface exploration program. So how we plan and implement that program to augment our current state of knowledge. And then using that to build a three-dimensional geologic model to supplement and support project development. We have groundwater and surface settlement monitoring programs that we're going to be developing and implementing. Seismic studies, especially in the South Delta, are very important for the project development. Surveying roles, gas well mapping, so there's obviously the unknown gas wells present a risk to the project. And ultimately, geotechnical input to the planning and design phase. That's really how this all rolls up. Joe mentioned the organization chart. I think the most important thing here is he's my boss, so no further questions on that. Moving on, I'm somebody else's boss, so I have a team of survey lead, right-of-way lead, and geotechnical. And right now, we have a team of over 45 professionals working either in the current space or remotely. And that'll ramp up significantly when we begin to implement the fieldwork execution, the fieldwork itself. Moving on. So just a summary of some of the key work products that are addressed by the Fieldwork Execution Plan under the heading of geotechnical is again reviewing existing and current project data, building a three-dimensional geologic model to serve the project, developing and implementing these exploration plans to fill data gaps, to mitigate risk that's been identified through that development. Developing and implementing a geophysical test program. So that's one of those words I was probably told not to say, but they are less invasive exploration techniques that may be brought to bear on this project to reduce the more invasive traditional exploration methods. Groundwater and settlement monitoring. This is a big issue. We need to better understand regional trends in groundwater, surface water, and also things like subsidence to see how that affects the project and how the project might affect the region. As well as surveying, and I mentioned seismic. So the roadmap, apologize, I have to look over there, make sure I'm on the right slide here. The roadmap and fieldwork execution plan addresses 3 years of exploration. Didn't do us any good. We need to think beyond just what's happening in fiscal year 1920. And what it does is it maps out a multi-phased investigation approach, which each phase builds on the prior phase to fill data gaps that were identified, engineering needs, outreach and support needs, and ultimately to mitigate the risk on the project, and so that we have a better understanding as we move forward. This first phase is really designed to address a geologic understanding of the delta. We want to avoid any piecemeal, let's look at one particular island. We want to understand the delta as it affects development of alternatives, selections of routes, that kind of thing. And then, so as I mentioned, we're on track to start our fieldwork exploration in early 2020, and then immediately we'll be planning for the fiscal year 2021 exploration program, and then adjust that based on the findings of as the data comes in. So one of the things that I'm kind of excited about, and I think is really important and it's new with this program, is that it's one of our major current tasks is understanding what existing data is already out there in the Delta. And thanks to our friends at DWR, we've identified, this is just, every one of these dots represents either a water well or a subsurface geotech borehole in that region that was provided to us by DWR. First step is, there's a lot of dots on that, so we screen it to identify those that are within the area that we're concerned about. And that leaves us, believe it or not, with 21,000 exploration locations that represent data. Now, some of that's not particularly useful for what we're doing. It's very shallow. It may just be a test pit. But much of it is deep and useful data. So we're going through a process right now where about 6,000 of the points are completed of the 21,000. We're basing our ranking criteria on characterization of the soils, how well they describe the soils, these old boring logs. The legibility, some of these are just handwritten junk, frankly. Is that
So
on the record?
the green is, and the yellow.
Oh, the green represents the first, I knew somebody would ask that. That's good catch. The green represents data for which there's points for which there's no existing data. So we weeded those out. So all the orange points, that represents the 21,000, have some sort of physical log or written log associated with those data points. The goal is to get to the high-value historical exploration data to help us build that model and to supplement. So I mentioned we're 6,000 of the 21,000 through this, and of that, something like 20% of them are considered very useful data. This will help supplement our current 200 or 300 borings that we currently have completed since 2009 on the program. This slide's my favorite. I'm not going to lie to you. That's why I have the most notes on it. So what do we do with all these data, right? Is we take that high-value data and we build a three-dimensional model, okay? And it's not for the sake of just playing geologist for the day. It's to guide everything from, well, I'll get to that. So what I do want to point out is these little cylinders, these little vertical cylinders in the lower image there, those represent just a handful of the current project borings that DWR completed under the prior project. And so, with an understanding of the geologic processes by which the delta was formed, right? So before sea level rose, this was, you know, the sea was out past the Farallon Islands. That geologic setting is buried under the current layers of peat that currently make up the delta. Understanding that process of how it formed, armed with these 21,000 points or whatever we decide are high value, we connect the dots, for lack of a better way of saying it, to build this three-dimensional model. And what does that get you? It allows us to cut cross sections like you see in the top left there. And also in the top left, it allows us to do geostatistics. So we understand the variability of the natural soil properties and how those, and ultimately to determine how confident we are in the numbers that we have. So we might have one particular parameter that's important to a tunnel design, for instance. How confident are we that we know that value with any reasonable certainty? That analysis will give us, give us those answers. So now we can make smart decisions about alignments, vertical and horizontal. We can provide the engineering and planning teams with relevant engineering data to do the analyses they need for footprints and impacts and final design and all that fun stuff. And most importantly, allows us to identify data gaps, right? So just because I've, understand, it allows us to make smart decisions about where we know nothing or where our data is limited or those data, that confidence level. It allows us to boost that confidence level. So, fun stuff. Right? So, current and ongoing work activities right now, I mentioned the primary one is obviously screening these data to build this geologic model. That's the last two there. But we've also created a geotechnical requirements list, which is quite comprehensive by facility type. So what type of data do you need for an impoundment, like a levee or a dam, if you will? What do you need for tunnel design? What do you need for access road design, that kind of thing? We're identifying those data. We're working on developing, or we've pretty much developed temporary entry permit and associated documentation to because many of these explorations will require private landowner agreements to access their property. So we're working on that, documenting procedures, standards, and QC processes for all this. And we're all on track to get started in the beginning of next year with field work. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Eddie. Any questions?
I have a geeky question.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
so sorry. I apologize to everybody. But your geophysical tests, just because I'm interested, what kind of tests do you have there that are not so invasive?
You should reveal that you're like a scientist too.
Yeah, okay, I'm a scientist.
All right, we'll get to the bottom of it.
We're gonna get to the
The
bottom.
world of geophysics, and I'm not an expert in it, but I have people on my team that are experts in it. It involves everything from what they call downhole geophysics, where you send a pulse or a signal or you measure resistivity between 2 points at depth, to surface geophysics, where you lay out an array and you send small pulses of electricity into the ground, very low voltages, and record. It can be what they call seismic, which has nothing to do with earthquakes, but has to do with the velocity of a wave traveling down. So you might set up a little you might set up sensors in an array and then strike the ground with a sledgehammer, for instance. And as that wave goes down and comes back up, you can, using a series of pretty smart people and algorithms, you can get an understanding of the subsurface conditions. Our goal is to work on Bolden Island, work with our partners on Bolden to test out a variety of these geophysical techniques and determine whether they will provide useful results and whether they can be used to supplement or replace some of the more conventional, more invasive drilling holes kind of thing.
Cool.
Does that answer that
Yeah,
question?
kind of. Yeah.
Great.
I have to do a little more look at that because it's
Yeah.
so interesting to me.
Any other questions? Okay, have Mr. Burke come on up. Mr. William Burke. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm William Burke. I'm here on behalf of the County of Sacramento.
Yes.
I have a question about the fieldwork roadmap slide that you had up here a few minutes ago. At the very top of that graph, there's a row for permit applications. I was wondering what that entails, what permits you're going to apply for.
I think, Carrie, do you want to take that? That's
So there are a variety of permits we're working on. Right now, we're looking at CEQA analysis so that we can analyze the environmental effects. And the permit applications depend on which investigation we're talking about, so it goes into some depth. I know that there is an ongoing lawsuit with Sacramento County, and that part I can't really comment on until that's complete.
Okay, well, you guys aren't a party to that lawsuit right now, but for the record, I can state that the County of Sacramento does have a permit requirement pursuant to its well drilling well ordinance, and that ordinance applies to the kind of geotechnical exploratory boring that's being proposed here, and that ordinance does apply to private entities as well as public districts, public entities. So that is a permit requirement that you'll want to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move right along then to 7C. Consider passing resolution to establish the DCA Delta Stakeholder Engagement Committee and forming an ad hoc committee of the board to assist in reviewing applications to that Stakeholder Engagement Committee.
So what you have in your packet is a proposal to form a stakeholder committee that allows the DCA and DWR to work directly with a wide array of interest groups in the Delta to exchange information, solicit feedback on the engineering construction aspects of the project. I've spent a lot of time in the Delta over the past few months listening to what people had to say about the project and ways in which we could improve. And a sentiment that was routinely echoed by many was a request for the DCA to be more transparent. And this committee is a key component of achieving exactly what the public has asked. My goal is to make sure that the engineering information DCA puts forth in the concept engineering reports has been daylighted to the public, and a range of options to deal with issues have been vetted and the feedback documented. And this is one of many forums for that exchange. I can empathize with the Delta interest regarding impacts of this project, but if we don't agree to a dialogue in a constructive manner, we risk repeating, some of the perceived shortcomings that the community themselves has asked us to address. So the best that we can do right now is to begin to talk to each other. And with that, we have two presentations for this item. First, Josh will provide an overview of the proposed committee, including its size, governance structure, and scope. And then second, Janet Barbieri, who leads communications with DWR, will provide an overview of the larger stakeholder engagement process being conducted by the state and DWR and how this proposed committee fits into that process. We've received some initial comment letters regarding the committee, and we hope that understanding how this committee fits in the larger process will help address those comments that we've received.
Before we go on, let me quickly bring us to where this came from. In our May meeting, I had put on the agenda the question of an environmental compliance committee that was incorporated into our agreement, our joint powers agreement, requiring us to have a committee that would review compliance, both environmental compliance and mitigation. We discussed it a little bit, and I think we sort of agreed that the agreement should be updated somewhat, and but we should follow the general basis of the committee. There is an attachment to the agreement, the joint powers agreement, that points out what appointments should be made overall, both to the board and then to this committee. And that attachment said that we had a rotation, it was a sort of a rotation appointment on the board, both for the board itself, for the officers of the board, and also for this committee. One of those was a rotation to the contractors and Kern County. Kern County not yet being a board, the board agreed at that time that we should go to the next step, which would then rotate the appointments, the contractors appointing the chair of this committee, and Santa Clara Valley appointing the vice chair. That's kind of where we left it, and then we referred the process and the procedure and some of the update suggestions to staff, and that's how this report came back. I appreciate that our CEO had took a lot of time and had an opportunity to discuss with many different stakeholders. This, as I mentioned, we raised it in May. We assigned it to staff at that point. So staff's been pretty active talking to people all over the Delta and elsewhere for the last few months. So I appreciate that work. And that's so this is basically a product of those efforts. So, okay, Josh.
Thank you, President Estermeyer. What I was hoping to cover is first provide a background of kind of where we, how this item came before you, and I think President Estermeyer did a lot of that already. The second would just be to talk about the proposed committee and its scope and governance. Then we'll talk about the application, the proposed application process and next steps, and then follow with the staff's recommendation. For the background and sort of why staff is recommending this stakeholder engagement committee, as President Estermeyer noted, there's an environmental compliance and mitigation committee identified in the JPA. That is really intended to apply during the design and construction phase when there's clearly a project and there would be mitigation measures that we'd be ensuring compliance with. That sort of committee doesn't really have the same role or frankly any role during this planning phase. And so there have been discussions at past board meetings about forming this or a similar committee. We've gone out, we've talked to member agency staff, we've talked to DWR, and there really has been a recognized need for a forum to receive input from specifically Delta stakeholders on DCA activities. And DCA activities is underlined in your slide because there's been some discussion and some concern about this committee and its scope. And it's really important to note that this committee is completely focused on what we as the DCA are doing. And so going to the next slide, we're currently in the planning phase as defined in the Joint Exercise of Power Agreement Amendment Number 1. And DWR is considering a potential Delta conveyance as well as alternatives and conducting the necessary review under CEQA and applicable law. During that phase, we as the DCA are providing assistance to DWR specifically on design and engineering related to the conveyance. And I think you heard from Joe and Andrew about that's the type of work that we're assisting with. And we also can provide assistance on stakeholder engagement and similar issues as related to what we're doing. And so moving to the proposed committee before you, it'd be entitled the Delta Stakeholder Engagement Committee. It would be an advisory committee to the DCA board, which is permitted in the JPA. Staff's proposal is to chair that committee with a DCA director, with an alternate director appointed in the event that the chosen chair is unavailable to attend. And the scope of the committee. I normally don't like to put paragraphs of text on PowerPoint slides. I don't think it's very helpful generally. But I think in this case it's really important. So that is from the resolution itself essentially. That is the scope of this committee, and I've highlighted a sentence which I think really focuses on what we're hoping that this committee does. And it really is a forum for discussions which hopefully will include problem-solving efforts to consider engineering and design considerations in the development and design of a proposed or potential conveyance project that avoid, reduce, or mitigate significant impacts to environmental and cultural resources in the Delta and affected communities. That is, in one sentence, what we're hoping that this committee does. Moving on to the next slide, we also wanted to have some flexibility there, and so Janet in her presentation will talk a little bit about some of the larger stakeholder process, and so it is possible that as that process develops, DWR may refer issues to this committee for them to consider or provide input on, but again, that would be, it need to be within the scope of those DCA activities. We also wanted to make it clear what this was not a forum for and what this was not a part of. And so specifically, it's not a forum to have a debate about whether or not to have a conveyance project. The decision of whether to move forward with a conveyance project is something that DWR will consider through the environmental process. There will be, as Janet will mention, robust stakeholder engagement through that. But this committee, because it's a DCA committee, is really not the place for that discussion. And then, as mentioned, it's not going to be part of the larger CEQA engagement process as well. Moving on to the membership of the committee. Staff's proposing 17 members. One member, as mentioned, would be a DCA director that would chair the committee. The other 16 members would be chosen from members of the public from various Delta stakeholder groups. You'll notice in the packet there was a draft application form as well as a summary. That draft application form had a list of boxes. Those are the stakeholder groups that we're hoping will be interested in participating. And that summary that was included in the packet is what we'll be sending out with the application process if the board decides to move forward, so that folks are aware of kind of what we're looking for and what this committee will be about. We also recognize that there are going to be some state and local agencies that we will be looking for input on and will have interests in what we're discussing. So those would be things like transportation or emergency operations and those things. So we're proposing to have 5 ex officio members who wouldn't be official members of the committee, but would be there to attend meetings, provide advice, provide input, and really just be part of the process. The proposed meetings for the committee will occur once or twice a month at a location in the Delta. Those dates and times will depend on member availability. There's an initial work plan that's being developed for the committee, and that will last for approximately 6 months. As you may have noticed in the resolution, we will be reporting back to this to the board regularly as the committee moves forward, and so we'll be updating you as that work plan is developed and accomplished. There'll be a focus on discussion and consensus, and so this is not intended to be a voting body. So it's not a real traditional decision-making entity. It's really a forum for people to have discussions. And so the way it's set up, all decisions will be made by consensus, but recognizing that consensus isn't always possible, there would be an opportunity for those who had a minority view to provide that minority view in whatever writing was developed. So the appointment of committee members, the chair and the alternate chair will be appointed by the board. Staff's recommendation would be that be at a future meeting when the committee is appointed. Other committee members would be appointed by a public application process. All members serve at the pleasure of the board. For stipends and reimbursements, chair and the alternate chair would receive reimbursements for their expenses, but public members would receive a stipend of $250 per meeting in lieu of reimbursements or other compensation. And then lastly, important to note, because this is an official advisory committee of the DCA board, all of the local transparency laws that apply to you will apply to this body, and that specifically includes the Public Records Act and the Brown Act. So we anticipate at the formation of this committee, if the board decides to move forward, to have a training with committee members to ensure everyone's aware of the requirements. So the next steps, if the board decides to move forward, first would be to notify the public. This would be done by posting the application on the DCA website. We also will be looking to put links on other websites and do e-blasts to get the word out. Completed applications need to be submitted by email or postmarked by October 4th. Applications would then be reviewed. Staff is hoping that the board is willing to appoint an ad hoc committee to help us through that process, and so that's part of the item before you today. And then to ensure that we can get moving on the process, we're hoping to have the appointment of committee members in October and potentially at a special meeting on October 10th if the board's available. And then we'll be shooting to have the committee with its first meeting later in October. And then for the recommendation, we're looking first for your feedback on the proposal and governance structures. Second, for you to consider adopting the resolution forming the committee. And then third, considering whether to form an ad hoc committee to assist us with evaluating the applications. And with that, I turn it over to Janet.
Thanks
very much.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about public outreach and stakeholder engagement for Delta Conveyance overall. And my goal is really to provide you with a snapshot of how we're approaching communication in general, but also how the stakeholder engagement committee that you're contemplating today relates to that overall program. The first thing I wanted to do is just talk a little bit about our guiding principles. These are the things the philosophy, if you will, that will drive our approach. It's the types of things that we're hoping to, infuse in the DNA of the team. So I thought it would be important to talk about that. One is respecting the Delta as a place and the people who live there, keeping the Delta community and broader state interests well informed, keeping our word, always looking for opportunities for win-wins, walking the walk on climate, using best available science and engineering to drive decision-making, deploying world-class problem-solving, and hitting budget and schedule targets. I'd like to go through the objectives of our stakeholder engagement program. And I'd really like to stress that last bullet there, building trust through transparency, commitment, and follow-through. It's very important to all of us, to me in particular, and I want everyone to hold us accountable for that. And to that end, I will provide my email and my phone number later on today. I really encourage people to reach out to me to talk about that. If they feel like we're not holding up our end of that bargain, I want to hear about it. It's an important aspect of what we're trying to accomplish. But overall, we are aiming to provide clear, concise, accessible, and timely information to the public. We want to facilitate a public participation program through this planning process. We hope to improve mutual understanding, encourage dialogue, and facilitate constructive public input. And now I'd like to talk about the overall program. There's 3 primary elements. We have in the middle is the Stakeholder Engagement Committee that you're contemplating today. On the right is the DWR CEQA process, which includes, of course, public meetings. And then on the left is Secretary Crowfoot's Delta Water Roundtable. There has been some correspondence this week, a little bit of concern, I think, that Josh mentioned about sort of the nature of the committee and what it's supposed to accomplish and how it all fits together. I thought I'd read just a little bit from that correspondence. I think it might be helpful to put it into context. The first thing is that it's important that any design and engineering that's planned anticipate and reduce local impacts wherever possible and identify any potential community benefits that could be generated as a part of the project. Okay. This proposed subcommittee, however, is not meant to be the primary venue for stakeholder input on the project. It would not replace the formal public engagement process that is required under CEQA. DWR will be conducting a new CEQA process to review a single tunnel proposed project, and that process will include a separate scoping process to gain input on the evaluation of a range of alternatives, including a no project alternative. The process will include opportunities for public and Delta stakeholders to provide input on a full range of environmental matters, including measures and alternatives that could avoid or reduce impacts on the proposed project. And then I just also wanted to mention briefly the Secretary Crowfoot's Delta Water Roundtable. That forum will provide an opportunity for direct conversation with a broad cross-section of leaders on the bigger issues facing the Delta, and that might include things like levees, flood protection, water quality, farmland preservation, aquatic invasive species, etc. So that group is a larger, sort of open to a larger conversation. So hopefully that helps describe the difference between those 3 areas and how the proposed Stakeholder Engagement Committee fits into the overall program. I just wanted to mention a couple of objectives for the Stakeholder Engagement Committee. It's to provide an additional and open, transparent forum for the exchange of information and ideas. We want to memorialize feedback following that dialogue, gain input and consensus on the best ways to avoid or minimize impacts, and gain input and consensus on win-win ideas to integrate temporary or permanent facilities with community benefits. The basic framework, Josh talked about some of this, but I just want to reinforce a couple of things. He mentioned the 16 members appointed by the board, chaired by a board member, representing a broad range of Delta issues. And so the idea there is to identify certain areas, recreation or agriculture, environmental justice, historic preservation, tribal governments, where that representative, that member, would liaison within that community. They'll be asked to solicit input and bring that input from their broader Delta constituency back to the group. They'll be meeting, at least we anticipate right now, that they would be meeting about twice each month for the first 6 months, and that would be followed by monthly after that.
We're anticipating that each session would be 2.5 to 3 hours, and that there would be a report out to the DCA board on discussion and feedback that occurs at the Stakeholder Engagement Committee meetings. And as Josh mentioned, compensation for the time commitment involved. So the next slide talks a little bit about some of the considerations that the committee would take up. There's a couple of foundational items there at the front end: background on Delta Conveyance, background on operations. And then the other items are public benefits, some of the corridor drivers, and reducing impacts. You can see there's quite a bit to cover there in 6 months, the first 6 months. It is a fairly heavy lift. And so we are also recognizing that we need to provide the right amount of resources to the committee so that it's not all on them. We have staff members available to them, informational materials available to them, in addition to the remuneration for the meetings, just acknowledging that it's a fast burn rate, quite a bit of work. We will, prior to each meeting, distribute information and hope the committee members will be soliciting input from their interest groups, discuss and answer questions at the committee meetings. And then after the meetings, there will be a written report prepared, and that will be presented to you here at this board meeting. So with that, I do have my contact information up there. If anybody has questions or comments for me later, welcome to do that, but any questions you have for me.
Janet, could we get a copy of that PowerPoint, because it wasn't in our packet?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, let's have a quick discussion on the recommendations. I'll just go directly to the recommendations, and then I obviously don't see any objection to forming the committee. As I mentioned, pursuant to, I still believe we need to follow our joint powers agreement in form, and that we have this committee. We call it the engagement committee. We understand that it's going to be updated a lot more than what we initially thought about when we included it in the agreement.
President Shermer,
yes.
we may want to take public comment before board discussion, if that's okay.
Well, generally I have board discussion first.
Okay.
Unless the board wants to hear public comment first. We do have one. I think we have one.
Yeah, let's hear it. Because,
Okay.
it
Ms.
might
Meserve?
inform the way
I don't think so, but
look at our own questions.
you're welcome to address us.
There's one more that I was bringing up. Okay.
Do you have any others?
Not that I know of.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I mean,
We're trying not to disturb the meeting by walking in front all the time.
yeah.
We
have
could always
people that
do
have to fly
public
around and
comment
stuff,
over
so-
there, maybe. But anyway, good afternoon. My name is Osha Meserve.
Good afternoon, Ms. Meserve.
And I did submit a letter yesterday on behalf of local agencies of the North Delta and San Joaquin County, kind of just initially responding to the ideas that are put forth in the staff report about the committee. I think a couple ideas that strike me in reading the materials and listening to the presentation is it does still seem premature or confusing or both, because I notice it looks like you want applications by October 4th, which is just a couple weeks away, and apparently it's to inform the conveyance project only, and there's sideboards around the committee that do not allow it to talk about issues that may be very important to Delta stakeholders. So it seems that it's, and then I just saw the list in Ms. Barbieri's slides about everything it intends to accomplish, which goes all the way into operations, and it really begs the question, what are you asking for input on? And if it is a conveyance project, in which we all kind of think we know what you mean, but no one has said, because there has not been an NOP on this, and there will not be one, I guess, for a number of months still. So it's very confusing to ask people by a couple of weeks if they would come and basically be at your mercy to talk about whatever you tell us the project is. And so I think, you know, we have some real concerns about proceeding with the committee and the way that it's set up. And I think that if it was more open and if it was more connected with the other processes still going on, like the portfolio process and some of these other things that we're looking at, a broader view now that the Twin Tunnels project is no longer approved and no longer being pursued, I think you would have interest maybe in interacting more with your group about that broader suite of things. But to confine it in like this, and then to say that it needs to be done within a couple of weeks, I think it's sending a very mixed message, and I think we're very concerned also about if Delta stakeholders would spend the time to participate in this committee, who would they be convincing to undertake these measures that may make the project, if I think I know what it is even, which I don't know, more complicated, more expensive, and that the very leaders of your JPA are the very entities that, like Santa Clara stated in its resolution a couple nights ago, that Santa Clara has to come first and that everything else comes behind that. And I think we're very concerned about, as Delta stakeholders, we come last. And I appreciate the thought that's been put into this, but I still think it's premature and needs to be thought out better, and that's why we'd ask that you not form the stakeholder committee in the way it's been proposed at this time. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes.
If there's another public.
I don't think so. I think that's it.
Okay.
Okay, yeah,
I
I don't
just-
have any other requests. Well, look,
It's okay.
this is it. Does anybody have any opportunity to, you have an opportunity now to tell us that you want to address us? Are there any other folks that want to address us? I mean, you come on up and fill out a card, as I mentioned from the beginning.
I gave it to you.
Mr. Wilson?
It says you don't seem very interested in listening.
Mark Wilson, Wilson Farms and Vineyards, Clarksburg. I had some concern about this being a Brown Act process. My concern is that would keep participants in the process from speaking to each other in groups between meetings. I think as this process proceeds, people in this advisory committee will hear opinions and learn things from each other and about the process, about the project as this progresses. And I think it's an opportunity missed if the advisors are under Brown Act constraints and can't get together and maybe work out some things between them that might be more valuable to the process, and maybe even things like some minority reports that may inform the process later on down the road. And so that's one concern that I have. A request would be that the work plan, we have sort of an outline that we just saw of the work plan, and I would request that work plan come out really immediately, so potential participants that would be in this process can get a pretty good idea of what the work plan is, and of all the people that would be in that pool that would possibly want to apply for this, they can see where their interests and expertise might be might apply more or less to the process. And so I think it would be really a disservice to have people apply, be picked for the process, and then see the detailed work plan. So I think that should be out ahead of time. And that also, with that work plan out ahead of time, it allows people who may be thinking about getting into the process to talk with others in their interest group ahead of time, and maybe there's somebody else who would fill that position better. So those are my comments, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Have one more. Ms. Melinda Terry?
Yes, good
afternoon.
afternoon. Melinda Terry. I wear two hats. I'm the manager of the North Delta Water Agency, which is about 300,000 acres, almost half the legal delta. We have a water supply and quality contract with the State Department of Water Resources. And in that role, when the project was BDCP, we did sign on to be on the steering committee. which involves signing an agreement. We also were a cooperating agency with the Bureau of Reclamation for both the BDCP and the Water Fix program. It would be nice if we did at least have like a notice of preparation so we had a little bit more idea about the new version of the project. It would be helpful as well to have more time, as was discussed, because there's a lot of what we don't know. I am interested to know what is going to be required. So for instance, like I said, for BDCP, there was an actual agreement that set parameters that we were going to have to stick to. I would like to know what those are, frankly, you know, before talking to my board of directors about, you know, whether we join this one. The other hat that I wear is I'm the executive director of the Central Valley Flood Control Association, which is more than 70 reclamation districts, cities, and counties that have levee maintenance responsibilities that include the Delta area. And I for sure, out of your 16 people that you're going to have, I want to, you know, recommend that you are going to need to have a flood control person represented on that. At least prior versions of the project, we kept trying to explain to the state that I don't think you understand what you're getting into, because you're going to try and build on what's called an Army Corps levy, project levy. Their permitting process, the DWR hasn't experienced yet, but it's quite the process. I mean, they're going to require you to be at 60% design before you can even apply for their 408 permit. So there's a lot involved, but they have the expertise to kind of understand those hydrodynamics that every action has a reaction will occur from a large project like this. But you know, maybe some more time to apply and more information on exactly what our involvement would entail.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Did you want-
Yeah, oh, I appreciate your, Mr. William, in terms of your desire to find out what the scope of work might be. I think that should be an important part of it. Also, what the proposals might be in terms of time. I know this is a huge, it is basically very fast getting this going. Part of it is that we're not DWR, and so we're not doing the CEQA stuff, and we're trying to get as much input from people that, you know, I think we failed to get it really in the first iteration of this, in terms of real input from the folks that, I mean, we talk about skin in the game, and yeah, we've got agencies who have a lot of skin in the game in terms of money, but the folks who live in the Delta have real skin in the game. They live here. And so part of it is making sure that we hear people's concerns, and also there's a lot of bright people out there who really do have some very good ideas, and though we don't have the actual plan of what our alternatives might be, that's coming up, but wouldn't it be nice to be able to take into consideration what some of the inputs are in terms of some of the main concerns. For example, last month I was talking to someone who came up to me and said, well, you know, we really are so concerned about our little town getting inundated where the dogs can't cross the street type of thing, and it's an historical town, and we're, you know, really concerned about that. And that's kind of input that we want to hear. Also, what people may have ideas for alternatives, or ideas of what alternatives sound the best to them and why. And so that's the kind of thing that we're really going for. And being a Brown Act type of thing, it does make it transparent, and I understand folks wanting to be able to talk to each other. But remember, with a Brown Act limitation, it just simply means that you can't have more than a majority of the people getting together and talking to one another. So if it was a 16-member board, hey, 7 of you want to get together and sit down over a beer and you know, talk about stuff, you certainly can, as long as you don't daisy chain it. I mean, there's all kinds of little things about this, but yes, go ahead.
And Director Palmer, just to your point, yeah, and that's one of the reasons we want to do that Brown Act training, just to go over all of the nuts and bolts of how that works, so people understand the requirements.
Right, and I've probably spoken enough at this point, so if I have any more, I'll not be shy.
So I can
Did you
make
have
a
something?
comment or two.
Yes.
So I generally am supportive of Catherine's reasons for having this committee. I think what you're after, Catherine, is to engage in as transparent a way as possible those stakeholders who are in our local area up here in the process. I think that I share their frustration, as I heard from the public comments today, about lack of understanding of what it is that they're supposed to do. We all sitting here wondering what kind of project we're gonna end up with. So we've got the same similar frustrations. But I don't think that we should let that stop us from going ahead. I think that this is a very novel approach of taking what started out as something else, morphing it into something that we can actually use and get some real information and allow the stakeholders that want to get engaged and want to be proactive to participate and do so. So I'm supportive of this. There's a few little tweaks that I would, make if it were up to me alone, but I'll go along with the layout that I see. I'll make one other comment. Mr. Wilson, I believe it was, suggested that he doesn't like the Brown Act. Personally, I agree with him, but there are good reasons why it really should be a Brown Act. So again, I'll go along with that.
Rich?
Yes, I don't want to repeat what other people have already
Yes.
said, but I would like to just say that I want to compliment the staff and the working with DWR and Secretary Ray Crawford on this process. I think it's something that we need to do. And as a person that's worked with the Brown Act for a long time, I agree it is, but that's the way public meetings are held in California at the local government level. And so I think we have to go along with that. And so I'm happy to make a motion to say that we go ahead and support and consistent with Josh's legal points, let's make this into a stakeholder engagement committee and make sure that we're clear about that process. It may be, as far as the deadline of applications, my experience is give everybody a deadline, and if we need to extend it later, we can do that. But let's notify everybody and let's start the process. So I'd make a motion to go ahead and support the staff's recommendation.
Before we do that, I have a few comments, and then we can figure out what the motions are. Well, before we get a second.
Well, we can always amend it.
Right. So that's why I say let's hold it, and then, so we don't have to keep amending it. I'm very concerned about, we have flights going out and all that, so that's why I'm pushing the meeting a little bit. But I did want to say, with respect to the committee, I grew up in a minority community where every infrastructure project is built right through our community, divides us, creates a lot of problems for everybody, a lot of dust, a lot of environmental problems, and we suffer through it all the time. And I had the experience all my life of being neglected by government during these construction projects. So I have been very insistent right from the beginning of the formation of this joint powers agreement that we have the community that's going to have to deal with construction impacts, be involved in how that happens, how it's done, how it's planned, and what happens, and what impacts there are after construction. My own experience on our board has been the same. We had many problems in our construction projects, and I am privileged to have had the opportunity to make sure that the same thing that happened to me and my family and my community didn't happen when I was on the board. And so I wanted to make sure that on this board, in this conveyance project, we didn't do the same thing. That's why we want a stakeholder committee. That's why we want people in the community involved. So that we know from the beginning, not after all the plans are made. I understand it's nice for us to have a complete plan to look at. But you want to participate in the plans. You want to participate in how we construct and how we plan. You don't want to know about it afterward. Maybe you do. But in my experience, I don't want it to happen to me. I want to know exactly what's going on. I want to participate, and I want my community to participate. That's why I think it's important to have this kind of committee. And with respect to the Brown Act, the big problem is, believe me, as Steve says, we could be a lot more efficient without the Brown Act. We could have had all these meetings in secret and then let you know later what we're doing or not doing or what we decided or didn't. So yeah, there's a lot of downsides to the Brown Act, but we don't have secret committees. And this isn't gonna be a secret committee. And that's why we stream all of our committees, all of our meetings, so that people can see, because it's not just the folks who show up to meetings that care about what's going on, or are interested or impacted, or there's a lot of folks in our communities and all the people that we represent and all our neighbors who are very interested, can't show up for whatever reason, but they care about what's going on, and so we want to have open meetings. So there has to be a balance. And I think my colleagues have mentioned how, we try to, because of the size of the committee, we'll still be able to talk to our friends and neighbors on the committee, and of course, all the folks in the community. So I do think this is a good idea. This is something that we really need, and I'm very happy that we're able to do it. My only concern is I do agree with the compensation, but I still want to insist that we go by the planning agreement with respect to a chair and a vice chair. I've never seen a Brown Act committee that has a chair and an alternate chair, whatever that means. I just think we need to go, just as we did this agreement, when we wrote this agreement up, there were specific appointments that we were going to make, and they were going to be rotated. And I think it's important for us to maintain that with respect to this committee. So I think we have a motion, but I'd like to see the motion incorporate that, and also the compensation. I think those are the only issues, right?
So it sounds like the only change that you really want to see is as opposed to just saying chair and alternate chair, just chair and co-chair.
Yeah, chair and vice chair, and I think that we should go
Or I
through
meant
the
co-chair,
rotation,
vice chair, sorry.
that you appoint the chair and I appoint the vice chair, and then it rotates to the next group and so on, because that is a balance between the other appointments that are made, such as the chair to this board is rotated. And I think when we did that in the agreement, there was a balance to it. So everybody gets a turn with the folks that we represent. So that's why I think it's important for us to go through that, because in 2 years or the next term, we will rotate again on the chair for this board and for the other two committees. That includes the finance committee. So it's important for us to maintain that. That's why I insist that we do that.
So just a clarification, there are 2 action items that staff recommended. One is adoption of the resolution forming the committee, and that could be as amended, as discussed. And then the second, which hasn't really been discussed, would be a potential formation
We'll discuss that real
of the
quick
ad
right
hoc
after this.
committee.
Yeah. No, I haven't forgotten.
Yeah.
So if that's okay with you, Richard? And there's a second?
Okay, second.
Yeah, Sarah, okay. Those for motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Okay. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, very quickly on the ad hoc committee to review the, I don't know, 1 to 100 applications that we have. Any suggestions? Any volunteers? Should we do the same, should we do you and I and the staff, or?
Well, as long as staff is involved.
Well, yeah, they better be about, there's too much otherwise, you can whittle it down for us or something.
One of the things that we really want to see, I mean, in terms of thinking about this, is we'd like to see a representation from all the different parts of the Delta, as, geographic distribution in the Delta, and so they have to be from the Delta, I think, and then also, different interests as well.
I think it was, you have a list in here, yeah, so,
It's on the application.
yeah, so, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right, that's what we hope to accomplish. And we're trying to get folks to apply accordingly, so we're
So
encouraging people from
I'd be
everywhere.
willing to go over that, provided staff did the heavy lifting.
Oh, no, I think that's why an ad hoc committee will mostly rely on staff to do all that. So if you'll do it, and we could do it, and these guys don't have to fly around. And then, of course, we'll bring it back for you to approve. Oh, we better get a motion for the ad hoc committee. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion as you have just outlined, Chair Estromera.
Is there a second? Okay, there's a motion, second. Those for motion say aye. Aye. Opposed say no, passes unanimously. Okay, we'll move right along before I lose a quorum. Let's see.
What are we on?
We were on C,
D.
so go to,
D.
No, D.
yeah, I think we were on C, so we'll go to consider passing resolution
Yeah.
authorizing award of contract to an audio-video AV systems integrator to provide equipment and installation services. And we have that in our
Yeah,
packet.
so directors, you have that in your packets. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them, but it's essentially, we did a competitive bid for the AV equipment for the new building. It's largely allowing us to work collaboratively through video conferencing, auto conferencing in all of our conference rooms. Because as Joe and or Andrew alluded, we have a lot of people in all over the country, if not the world, that are working on this project. And this will be the AV systems we put in the new building.
Second?
Those for motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Passes unanimously. Consider passing resolution authorizing award of contract on the IT managed services provider to provide IT equipment and support services.
So again, you have it in your package. I'm glad to answer any questions, but that's largely around having IT support in the new building to, as any organization would, to support all of the systems that will be up and running.
We're still hoping for January?
We are on target for January move-in for the desking area. We've had a 1-month delay on the board, first floor board area because of a demolition permit around an ATM machine. It used to be a bank, and
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
they won't leave the ATM with us. I know, we asked, but no.
Okay. I move we approve.
Second.
Those for motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Passes unanimously. Okay. Move right along to F. Consider passing resolution authorizing award. Yeah. Oh. Consider passing resolution authorizing the award of contract to Miles Treaster and Associates for office furniture. That's also part of that.
So again, we went through a competitive process around the office furniture selection. We had a group of 7 members who did site visits and proposals, and this was the highest qualified provider.
Second?
Those for motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. Consider passing resolution authorizing award of contract to primary and backup internet service providers for the new DCA office space.
And here, primary and a backup, just so if one goes down, we haven't lost all connectivity. Most of our
Yeah.
systems are cloud-based, so
Yeah, good idea.
it's exciting.
Move we approve.
Second.
Motion is second for approval. Those for motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries. H, September DCA monthly report.
Again, you have the second monthly report in there, still developing some of the content, but getting a little bit further along. If you have any questions,
And the
glad to
buttons
answer.
work this time.
Oh, great, I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear. Working buttons, that's
Yeah.
progress.
All right.
Okay, executive director's report.
Okay, in your package, you have the executive director's report. I did touch on the fact that we experienced a 1-month delay in moving into the new building just for the board space. We're still on target for January 1st for the rest of the building. Getting close to finishing up policies and procedures and rollout, and you heard a lot about some of the engineering and field work that's going on. So everything's looking pretty good. Do you have any questions?
No, I compliment you. You're on schedule. You're doing
Yep.
Well, Claudia is the hammer there, so
Go, Claudia.
All my credit goes to the team.
thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, how about the environmental manager's report?
All right, so there is a report in your packets.
Yes,
Generally,
Carrie.
we've been working to develop the public participation program, as Janet has already described in more detail. And we're working a lot on schedules and processes for the environmental work that's upcoming. We're still working towards issuing a notice of preparation towards the end of this year. Also, I wanted to let people know about a change in our internal team. Gary Lipner was the deputy director for Delta Conveyance, and he has now accepted a new position as the deputy director for flood within DWR. And so Tony Myers has joined our team, and Tony is here in the back of the room.
Another great name.
Yes. So Tony has been the Chief Operating Officer of the State Water Project and brings a lot of great experience to our office. As part of this, we are also moving into the State Water Project. So Tony's position is the Executive Director of the Delta Conveyance Office of the State Water Project. And that will also bring some synergy with the entire State Water Project for our office.
Great. How many Tonys we have in the audience? General Counsel's report.
Thanks, President Estromero. So I had the written reports in the packet, a couple of items I wanted to highlight. First was the Stakeholder Engagement Committee. Thank you for adopting that. We'll be moving forward with getting that application posted, working with the ad hoc committee as applications come in, and then potentially working with the board to schedule a special meeting to appoint that committee. Second, we recently had a Brown Act and Public Records Act training for the entire DCA team, just a reminder of sort of best practices for communicating with the board to avoid serial meetings and other pitfalls. And then lastly, on the comms procurement, we had, as we had mentioned at our last meeting, we decided to send that back out to hopefully get some more proposals, and excited to report that we got 5 as opposed to the 1 we got initially. So we're reviewing those currently, and we'll probably be bringing back a contract award at your next meeting. Thank you.
Great. Any questions? Okay, Treasurer's report.
Good afternoon.
Catano.
This works. Good afternoon, Catano Cassane. Is it working? Can you hear?
Oh.
Sorry. So good afternoon, Catano Cassane. This is the Treasurer's report for August. As you can see from the attachments that we had a little over $2 million ending of August 31st. And subsequently, we spent 2 payments significantly to deposit for the lease at 989th Street, a little over $635K. We also made another transfer for the excess improvement costs for about $654K, leaving a balance of slightly over $798,000. We have attached all the supporting documentations, and so if you have any questions, happy to answer.
Questions?
Thank you. Right here. Thank you.
All right. Verbal reports,
I have
have
a
any?
quick one.
Yes.
I have a quick one, sorry about this.
No.
Okay, I just wanted to say, this past week, I went on a tour with Region 4 for going into the Delta, and I know we've talked about the ship canal and that type of thing, and this is the first time I actually was on it, on a boat, looking at it. It was with the Liberty Island. We met at the Liberty Island Duck Club, and I found it really useful in terms, especially as we're looking at a stakeholder group.
Yep.
Because we had some people speak very passionately about some of the pros and cons of what a mitigation effort does to some of the agriculture folks, how some of the unforeseen circumstances might come up in terms of endangered species now moving into an area, and what this means, and what it means to punch a hole in a levee, and it brought a lot of it home to me. I learned a lot from it, and I think that kind of thing is really, really valuable. So we had somebody else also get up and speak quite passionately about get the input from the people who live there first before you do a project. And it was right on point in terms of what we're trying to do here. That was it.
Thank you,
Great,
Sarah.
thank you. Good report. Any future agenda items? We seem to have enough, so. Okay, so we'll call for adjournment. Stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.